Good morning. My name is Kathleen Lugerich, Senior Director of Historical Initiatives and Educational Development for the Army Historical Foundation, where our mission is to honor the American soldier by preserving and presenting the history and heritage of the United States Army. Thank you for joining us today for the Foundation's first ever Army History Book Club, where we will discuss Army history books with the Foundation's Chief Historian, Matt Seelinger, along with some fellow history and museum professionals. Joining the Foundation's Chief Historian today are Mike Knapp, who is the Director of Historical Services for the American Battle Monuments Commission, Melissa Ziobro, who is the Director of Curatorial Affairs for the Bruce Springsteen Archives and Center for American Music, and the Director of Public History at Monmouth University, and Joesph Craig, who is the Director of the Book Program for the Association of the United States Army. Today, they will be discussing Robert Edsel's book, Remember Us, American Sacrifice, Dutch Freedom, and a Forever Promise Forged in World War II. And before our program ends today, we will be joined by the author himself, Robert Edsel, who will give us a brief commentary on the research that went into his book and upcoming projects. And now I'm happy to introduce our host, Chief Historian and Editor of the Foundation's digital magazine, Matt Seelinger.
All right, thank you for joining us today and to our panelists as we discuss Remember Us by Robert Edsel. Okay, our first question to start off, and this is kind of a three-parter. On a scale of 1 to 10, how would you rate this book? Would you recommend this book, and would you recommend it in particular to people who don't normally read nonfiction or military history? Well, Mike, we'll start off with you.
Okay. Well, I'm going to roll my answer to all three parts into one answer, but yeah, I think I would give it a 10 of 10, and I would certainly recommend it, and I recommend it specifically, I think, to people that are not necessarily military historians. They're not necessarily people that read nonfiction, and I think the reason I would do that is I think it's very captivating because of the way the book is written and laid out with the stories of individuals, that for lack of a better term, it reads like a novel, but it's real. And I think it's a great entry point for people that aren't particularly familiar with military history and specifically aren't familiar with the role of the Americans and the Dutch in World War II. So I would heartily recommend it, and I think it's well worth a read by anybody, and it's a great way to get into trying to learn more about military history and the history of the U.S. In World War II.
Okay, Melissa, we'll go with you.
So I have to confess, I hate grading, whether it's in the classroom or in book club, right? But I would rate the book very, very highly, both as a work of history and as just a deeply human narrative. I was so very impressed by Robert's ability to move beyond this large-scale military history of World War II and instead really focus on memory, sacrifice, and the long-lasting impact of war in local communities, right? I, in my role as a public historian here at the Jersey Shore, interact with everyone from undergraduate students to adult lifelong learners. And I can tell you that a lot of people have this preconceived notion about history being boring. And if they think history is boring, it's because they think it is about counting beans and bullets and facts and figures. And when you insert the relationships, the human aspects of history, that's what makes the storytelling intimate and accessible. And Robert do that without, at the same time, oversimplifying the narrative. So love the book, rate it very highly, and think it will be of great interest to those who are inherently drawn to military history and those who might think they aren't, but will be after they read this.
Okay, thank you. Joe, how about you?
Well, as someone who loves military history and World War II in particular, I mean, I certainly love this book. I love the story. I would rate it very highly. But as my colleagues here have said, this is a book that really reaches out. It goes beyond combat to really tell the story of war's terrible cost on all society. So you're getting the stories not only of the soldiers, but of the civilians who are being affected. Whether that's people collaborating with the Nazi government being installed, whether it's resistance fighters trying to fight that, or whether it's most civilians just trying to keep their heads down and take care of their family during the terrible time. In the end, this really is beyond a World War II story. It's a human story. It's a story about sacrifice, what people are willing to give up to fight for higher ideals like freedom. And more importantly, it's about what those who remain, what their responsibilities are to recognize that sacrifice.
All right, thank you. I was just throwing my 2 cents here. I rate it very highly. It's probably a 10. I reviewed this book for Army Magazine, and it's the best. I've reviewed several good books, and this was, I would say, by far the best one I've read, and probably the best book I've read in quite some time. All right, question 2. Our next question, was there any particular section of the book that had an impact on you? We'll start with Mike again.
I think for me, the most impactful part was with the stories of the Dutch themselves. I mean, like Joesph, I'm a military historian by profession, so I read a lot of military history. But what you don't get, as he so rightly pointed out, is you don't get a lot of the background story, and specifically not of the people that are not in the military that are affected by this. So I would have to say that the thing that was most intriguing to me, that I really, really enjoyed, was the ability to really kind of dig deep into the Dutch experience during the war. And again, as Joesph pointed out, not just those that are living under the occupation, but the resistance, the families that are sort of tangentially tied into this, that have, they don't play a role in what's going on at that national level interacting with the occupation, other than the fact that they're forced to live through it. So for me, that was fascinating, and it was something that you don't get in a lot of other places. And I would offer that if you look at any of the countries that are occupied and that suffer through the war, the same would be true of them. And I think those stories are untold. So to me, that was the really compelling piece of this, was to really find out what was going on to the people that are dealing with all the circumstances that the war dumps in their laps.
All right. Melissa, how about you?
I also really appreciated this exploration of the relationships between the Dutch civilians and the American soldiers. I actually started my career as a historian, archivist, and curator for the U.S. Army Communications Electronics Command at Fort Monmouth, which is a now closed military base here at the Jersey Shore. And when I was writing my book, The U.S. Army's House of Magic, about Fort Monmouth, that was something I wanted to focus on, the relationship between the people at the base and those in the surrounding communities, right? Because again, to go back to my earlier answer, it's the human relationships that make the history you're ultimately trying to teach accessible to the broadest possible audience. And so those relationships, I thought, stories of families adopting graves, teaching the younger generation about the soldiers who liberated their communities. To me, those were just incredibly moving and impactful. Also, the idea that liberation created this lasting bond. I often hear people say that the remembrance of World War II and the celebration and gratitude for World War II soldiers is greater overseas than it is here at home, because for many Americans, World War II can feel distant or abstract because so much of the fighting did happen overseas. But I think Robert really shows how deeply personal those sacrifices remain in the Netherlands decades later. The gratitude wasn't symbolic or fleeting. It's really become a part of community life there. And so someone who, works in public memory, I was really struck by this idea of how remembrance and appreciation doesn't have an end date, doesn't have a use by date, if you will. These stories survive because people are really intentionally preserving them through their ceremonies, through their storytelling, photographs, etc.
Okay, thank you. Joe, how about you?
Well, there's a section at the end, towards the latter part of the book, after the war is completed, the cemetery is being established, and the Dutch have started to adopt the graves. And one of the major characters, the wife of the mayor of Maastricht, Emily Michaels van Kessenich, she is really trying to support this program, trying to let people know about it. And she realizes that one of the most important things is not just taking care of the graves, but to let the people back in America know about that, to let the grieving parents and families know that there are people who love those soldiers who sacrificed and are taking care of their remains. So she flies, to America. It's her first time making a trip like this. She spends weeks touring America. She does meet with some government officials, but by and large, she's meeting with everyday Americans who have suffered the pains of loss. And there are moments where, she's going to like American Legion meetings and talking to the parents of lost soldiers. And, these are people who, have not made major trips before. They really have no way to get to the Netherlands to see the site where their children are remaining. So she brings things like, maps and photos and the images of these parents reaching out and touching the spot where their child is buried. It's incredibly powerful.
All right, thank you. I wanted to add to that the section about the quartermaster, the grave registration units, and how they handled the dead and processed and buried them. It maybe said something about me, but I found that absolutely fascinating. Okay, let's go to question 3. Was there any one of the book's cast of characters, if you will, whose story you found most appealing or interesting? Mike, again, let's start with you.
Okay. Yeah, I would have to say the one that I really liked is the arc of Frida's story. First with her connection with Walter Hutchhausen, and then later with Gordon, whom she marries. And I found that kind of interesting, almost as a microcosm of sort of the background story, kind of the stuff that Melissa keeps talking about that is so true. So much so that in fact I found myself wanting to know more about her and Walter's life together, because we get that little tidbit at the end, and I'm like, well, what happened in between? But I found her really fascinating, and I think it was a really interesting case that here's somebody that made this connection, which of course is really, I think, the heart of the book is the story of this connection between the Dutch and the Americans, and carries this forward, and how that connection kind of stays throughout her life. And she was very compelling to me. I think they all were, quite frankly. I mean, again, as a military historian, I was aware of, Robert Cole, and, I think he's probably one of the more well-known folks. But to get to know the individual Dutch people in this book is just really, really fascinating. And she was one that was really intriguing to me. I think her story is, it's kind of a roller coaster. There's all kinds of emotions in it with her, which I think is wonderful. And again, that's what's so humanizing about all this. And I think that's a big hook for people.
Okay, thank you. Melissa, how about you?
Oh, you stole my answer. I was going to say Frida as well. One of the most compelling aspects of the book for me, and this is something I always endeavor to do in my own work, is that Robert doesn't just talk about the famous generals or political leaders, right? I think when we're doing history, we want to see people, read about people, learn about people that we can relate to. And so a lot of these characters are ordinary people whose lives just happen to be permanently shaped by these extraordinary times that they are living in. And so I was drawn to Frida's story, again, not to keep referencing my Fort Monmouth book, but that was one of the things I wrote about in the book, was how for close to 100 years, these soldiers would come and they would be stationed at Fort Monmouth, and then they would spend the rest of their lives in New Jersey because they fell in love with a local girl, right? But again, it's not just, me being flighty and preferring romance novels over military history towards that end goal of humanizing history and making people care about it. And so seeing stories about the American soldiers, as human beings rather than these, mythical figures. Many of them are just very young, very far from home, caught in these circumstances larger than themselves. And they are thrown into these circumstances where they are meeting other human beings who, at the opposite end of the spectrum, have been dealt this terrible hand throughout the war in their own hometown. And so how these lives come together, the soldiers, the civilians, the families, that's what really spoke to me the most. And I think, as the mom of two teenagers, as, a faculty member here at Monmouth University for 18 years, dealing with undergrads again and again, I was like, oh, this is a hook that would get my students interested in this story. And that's what we're always looking for, is a way to make the history accessible to as many people as humanly possible. So yeah, a teenage deaf girl falling in love with an American serviceman, it's almost made for the big screen. Not to jump on our next question, so I'll end it there.
Okay, thank you. Joe, how about you?
Well, there was a story of some American airmen that were downed during a mission. Pilot Bill Moore and bombardier John Lowe. They were helped by the resistance, to evade, Nazi capture. And I won't give away any specific details, but that they do make a flight at some point. Just to see the way they're interacting with these, local young men and women of the Dutch resistance, who are putting their lives on the line just as much as the combatants are. And in fact, the pilot, Bill Moore, makes that point repeatedly for, one of the young Dutch resistance men who said, I really wished I could be a soldier. And Moore reassures him that, you basically are. You are risking your life for freedom just as we are. So, it's a great story of how they're trying to, keep the fight going. And it ties in, at the end of the book with the story of one of the mothers that, Emily Michaels von Kessenek meets on her American tour, with his mother goes back to the Netherlands with the intention of bringing back her son. And she decides at the end, upon seeing the love, the outpouring of love that the Dutch are giving to her child and all the American servicemen, she makes a different decision and decides to let him rest there and be remembered. It's a great ending to the story, and one of many, many great stories within this book.
All right, thank you. I'm going to add mine, and that would be, and you mentioned it, Joe, Emily Michaelis von Van Kessernick. And I would say that she probably invented the term multitasking, because it's just exhausting reading about her. I mean, how somebody with that much energy, and also had, at the time, I think she had 11 kids. So it was pretty fascinating. Okay.
We move on from this topic of characters. If I can just interject one more thing, honorable mention for Jefferson Wiggins, right? This is something that always infuriates my students when we talk about the treatment of Black soldiers, in the whole Double V campaign during World War II. So I think that was another story that was very well told and served a unique angle here.
Okay, thank you. Next question. What are your thoughts about making this book a film or miniseries? Mike, let's start with you.
Okay, well, I think you could. The way it's laid out, I mean, the thing that jumped to my mind instantly upon reading it and then thinking about this question is that the recent miniseries they did, Masters of the Air, this would fit into that format perfectly, because it takes all these different stories and it kind of intertwines them, and each sort of story, the way Robert's written it, for the most part, they kind of stop at sort of with the chapter breaks. So it's not necessarily a cliffhanger in the sense of the Perils of Pauline, but it leaves you wanting a little bit more, and you could easily see that, I think, becoming a mini series, that these little stories, each episode, if it's weekly, you get a chapter and you get this little story, and they all sort of build to the culmination. They all get tied together in the end, and then you have the wonderful epilogue so that you can wrap up the package really neatly. And I think, I think this would be not working in this field, but I think this would be minimal work for a screenwriter to take the content and the research that already exists right here, and the character studies are so wonderful, and just turn that into something for a miniseries. Certainly you could make it into a film, but I think it would actually do better in a serialized format, because it would kind of build that tension and that anticipation as you went through the story.
Thank you. Melissa?
I agree, and Netflix is right down the road from me, taking up residence at former Fort Monmouth. So I don't know, maybe I should walk down there and pitch this to them. I think it would adapt really, really well, right? Because the best film, the best TV is character driven. We need the audience to fall in love with the characters, to have a stake in their narratives. And I think, the tremendous research that Robert has done, and the way he successfully brought these figures to life, does really lend itself to something that people could be invested in on the big screen. And I hope something like that could happen, because we have to confess, as relatable, as engaging as we are saying this book is, it deserves a broader audience than will read it. I think reading is at an unfortunate low here in society. So if we could get this on TV and get that story out there before even more people, how inspiring that would be. And it's not just about remembering the characters who are a part of this story, but I think inspiring us, right, to be our best possible selves as well. So I can see it, and I hope it happens.
Okay, thank you. Joe?
Yeah, I concur. I mean, it does seem to be well suited for a miniseries, and as Melissa notes, character is the most important aspect of drama. And with this book, you've got a wonderful choice of characters, representing a wide range of backgrounds. You don't have to create, a fictional, female character to, drum up some kind of love story. You've got that already, and you're seeing so many different stories. It's going to range, from the Netherlands to the United States. It would really do well to remind people what this book is really about. It's about recognizing sacrifice, remembering it into the future. I take my family to Arlington every year to do the Reads Across America, and to see people getting involved with that. I mean, thousands of people turning out for that event. I think there's a hunger for that kind of remembrance and in America, and it can build upon the civics teaching that really could use some boosting in our school system. So anything we can do to help tell stories like this to a broader American audience, I think would be well received and important to do.
Okay, thank you. This next question is specifically for Mike Knapp. Since you work with the American Battle Monuments Commission, and I'm guessing he did, but did Robert Edsel consult with anyone at the commission for his research? Let
me say yes, but that's not to say that ABMC wrote the book. This is Robert's book. I know we had a meeting about a year or so ago. Robert came and met with some of us and basically said, this is the project I'm working on, and here's what I'm looking at. And basically, ABMC said, well, we're here for whatever you need for us. We're happy to help. I know that one of my colleagues, a historian in my branch, and our deputy secretary looked at, I believe they looked at some drafts for Robert, and certainly he's interacted with the entire staff at the cemetery itself. So I would say we stood by to support Robert as needed, but the research, the work, and the idea and everything, that's his. So I don't want ABMC to take credit for his work, but we're very happy to work with him in any way that he needed us. And clearly, ABMC is a really small agency of the federal government that very few Americans are aware of. So anything like this that gets the American public to understand a little better where some of their tax dollars are going to support places like Margraten, one of our 26 cemeteries in 10 foreign countries, is wonderful for us. So the chance to have something as high visibility as this, with such name recognition for Robert Edsel and his work, is tremendous for us. And we're always happy to stand by and help, in any way that we can to support his project and this book in particular.
Okay, thank you. Now, before we close out the program, we have a special guest we'd like to introduce, the author himself, Mr. Robert Edsel.
Thank you very much.
Robert, thank you so much for joining us today. And would you mind telling us what made you want to write this book, and maybe some of your most memorable or favorite moments from this project as a whole, and then maybe talk about what's in store for the future?
I am an unusual author in the sense that I would not spend 8 years of my life doing research to write a book, period. But as a platform to convey a message, it's worth the effort. Mm-hmm. And that's what motivated me to tell the Monuments Men story. And it's the same situation here. I met Frida in 2016. And I knew about her when I wrote Monuments Men, and in the very end of that book, when I was wrapping up what happened to each of the characters, made mention that Walter Hutchausen was buried at the Netherlands American Cemetery, and his grave was watched over by this 19-year-old Dutch girl. But it never occurred to me that she might still be alive. Wouldn't have mattered for Monuments Men. I'd accomplished the purpose. But in 2015, when we succeeded in convincing Congress and ultimately President Obama to award the Monuments Men and Women with the Congressional Gold Medal, we invited all the family members, including Walter Hutchausen's nephew, and he mentioned to me that he'd just gotten back, from England, where she lived, because as was said earlier, she married a British soldier, and had a wonderful visit with Frida. Well, I felt duty bound to go meet this woman because she was the last person to see Hutchausen before he was killed. And my wife and I went to meet with her, and we actually, not by design, met with her on Memorial Day 2016. And she showed me all these photos of American tanks passing her home in September 13th, 1944, and meeting a lot of the American soldiers. And she said to me offhandedly, "Have you been to the American Military Cemetery?" And I said, "You mean the Netherlands American Cemetery?" And she said, "Well, we called it the American Military Cemetery." And I said, "Yes." And she said, "Are you sure?" And I said, "Yes, I'm quite sure. I've been there several times. So you probably know about the grave adoption program." And I said, "The what?" And she said, "The grave adoption program." And I was embarrassed. I didn't know about it. I was in disbelief what she was telling me. I said, "Are you trying to get me to believe that there were 17,000 boys and some women buried there, and all of them had Dutch adopters?" She said, "Well, I think that's right. I don't really know the details, but we were adopters." So I came back and started research on it, and I just thought it was the most amazing, moving, and frankly important and relevant story to today I'd ever heard. And for all of the accolades Monuments Men and the work of the Monuments Men and Women Foundation have received, this is frankly more important, because if we don't have our freedom, all of our efforts to preserve our cultural heritage really are for naught. And that to me is what's hanging in the balance today, this freedom, who are the men and women whose lives paid for it, and the horrific cost of having it, and how critical it is that we have to do some work to preserve it. And I think this story, my hope is, my belief is, we will be successful in having a film made. I agree, a miniseries I think is the suitable format to raise awareness for everybody, and just as the Monuments Men did, and get young people in this country engaged in understanding where that freedom came from and who paid for it. And this is where the Dutch are so successful in taking their kids out to that cemetery I refer to the cemetery in Margraten, frankly, as a field of dreams because, yes, there's this somber element there with 8,000 gravestones and 1,700 names on the walls of the missing. But they get their kids out there, and the cemetery is filled with life and youthfulness. And they have their kids stand in front of gravestones of American soldiers and tell them that these boys that are buried here, there are 4 women that are buried there, but these boys that are buried there were not much older than you are. And they have their whole lives in front of them, dreams, aspirations, just like you. And they gave that up so that you could be standing here and have the choices that you've got. And the Dutch kids, they know when Memorial Day is, and they know when Veterans Day is, and they know what the difference is. And that's a survey we're not going to see in this country because the results from it would be depressing, how few people really do understand. So I thought this was a chance through characters. I mean, women are great. They go to our World War II movies and they endure stories that are always predominantly men, combat, etc. Here's a chance to have 2 incredible female figures in Emily Mikkelsen van Kesnik and Joesph. I completely share your comments about Emily. I mean, what she did is as heroic as anybody that fought in combat. The courage she showed and the burdens that she had to endure, having 11 kids at the time, coming to the States, meeting with families for 5 weeks, making it up as they went, absorbing the grief of these families, and saying to all of them, you're going to get an election letter in the next couple of years. And we plead with you, leave your boys with us. We'll watch over them like our own forever. And for 81 years, the Dutch have honored that promise in a unique way. And I just find in the backdrop of the most destructive, horrific war in history, you have this transcendent moment of grace and remembrance and gratitude. And that's an extraordinary high watermark for humanity.
Okay. Is there any particular thing you're working on right now?
As I mentioned, the books that I write are really the opening salvo to a lot more work. Monuments Men book was out. We worked very hard to try and get George Clooney interested in the film, and were successful. And that transformed the work that we were doing. Now people all over the world, the film showed in 100 countries. The book's been translated in 35 languages. So there are people that are working in caves in Afghanistan and other tough places that may not speak English and haven't read the book or haven't had a chance to go see a movie. But if you ask them, why are they trying to preserve the cultural heritage of their country? They say, like Monuments Men. So that's the impact it has. Those are words now in people's vocabulary, and they know something about associating it with people that try and preserve our cultural heritage. We want to do the same thing with this story. Michael Knapp knows that we actually met with them many years ago when I was explaining the concept, and then visited with them in detail when we were working on the end flaps of the book, because we wanted to include maps of all the ABMC cemeteries for World War I and World War II in Europe and North Africa in the front of the book, and Pacific in the back of the book, because we wanted to help them do what they're charged with doing, which is raise national awareness about the fact we do have 26 overseas military cemeteries, and there are almost 100,000 Americans buried in them from World War II and other wars. And you know, it doesn't matter which country you're in, there's one that's close to you. Do yourself a favor, go visit them, walk the grounds, and all the words I have in my book and all the research pale in comparison to what you're going to feel walking any one of these cemeteries. And as Melissa said, looking at the dates on these gravestones and understanding just how young so many of these boys, the majority of the boys and women that are there were. And it's going to make you proud to be an American. It's just an incredibly beautiful thing that we do as a country. Where we fail, which each of you has touched upon, is we're doing great with our presentation of these cemeteries overseas, and we're doing, I think, good work connecting the local communities to their history. We are not doing the work that we need to do in this country, getting young people in particular aware of someone's paying for this freedom that you're enjoying every day. And fortunately, we treat our freedom like health. We don't think about it till we feel sick. And when we're sick, especially with guys, it's the worst day ever. And then we take medicine, we get over it, and we don't think about it anymore till we get sick again. So we have a lot of work to do in this country, and our objective in having a film made of this story is not retrospective about honoring the men and women whose lives paid for what we've got. It's as an opening, the next step in doing what the Monuments Men Foundation is currently engaged in with its Forever Promise project. And I encourage your listeners to check that website out. It's foreverpromise.org. The Dutch adopters, of which there are about 10,000 in the cemetery, there are 8,300 gravestones, more or less, and 1,700 names on the walls of the missing, all men except for 4 that are women. All of them have adopters, including the names on the walls of the missing. We're only in contact with about 1,800 of the families of the men and women that they look over. And that's for various reasons, but essentially our government didn't want to make available the names of next of kin in 1945-46, which is why Emily Van Kesnick came to the United States trying to basically hand gather names and addresses of family members. And it worked. It helped some, because the average ratio of American families that asked for their boys back at the end of World War II, by some miracle of fate, matched World War I, and 61% were brought back and 39% were left overseas. But in Margraten, it's about 46%. It's quite a bit higher. But we wanted to use the visibility of the book to try and finish what the Dutch started, and that was connect all 10,000 to all 10,000 relatives, or in the absence of there being a living connection, a school where they went to, or some other way of getting to 100%. So we went to the Dutch Foundation for Adopting Graves, which has done remarkable work. They're the catalyst for why for 81 years this promise has been honored, and said to them, let us help you find these people. So the Forever Promise Project has on its website a searchable database of all 10,000 men and women that are buried there. And we ask people that may have a relative there to go to the website, answers the short questionnaire. Are you aware there's a grave adoption program? What's your relationship to the person buried there? Are you connected with your adopter? Will you give us your consent to share your contact information with our colleagues in the Netherlands? And we've connected 450 American families in the last 6 months. This is just an awareness game. That's all it is. So we have various initiatives on Memorial Day this year, but more and more people are coming to us saying, we want to find the people in our town. We want to find the people in our community. How can we do that? And all the names are searchable on the database, but we'll also send them to them. Journalists are writing about it, providing lists. American Legion's been fantastic with a large article in their May issue about our work there. So we want to help finish this task. And it's a unique thing that the Dutch have done. It's recognized by UNESCO for its uniqueness as a custom. And we want to do everything we can do to help finish the task.
I just wanted to say how much I appreciate that. Robert, you're not just storytelling, right? You're activating that history to do good in the world that we live in right now. And then a question I was formulating, I realized might be irrelevant, because I was going to say, authors are always up against a word count, but maybe an author of your stature is not. My question was going to be, were there any stories that you could not include because you didn't have space?
Yeah, tens of thousands of more pages. I mean, it's funny. Hollywood's always talking about, we want more stories about heroes. I'm an expert on Margraten. I don't profess to be an expert on many things, but there's 10,000 of them up there. How do you tell the story of 10,000 people? Yeah, I mean, not everybody did something heroic, but they were heroes for giving their lives for freedom. Not everybody there was a saint. We're not pretending that they are. This isn't a hagiography, but there were some incredible sacrifices out there, and so many others that we couldn't tell. I had to choose some number of characters. We couldn't use 10% of 10,000. We couldn't use even 1% because there was just too many people. I ended up settling on about 10 to 11 soldiers, and I tried to make sure that we touched a number of bases, that we had someone from almost all the branches, that we showed the diversity of this immigrant country that we are by not only having Black Americans, Asian Americans, et cetera, but we had a Native American. That was an important story to tell. We had twins. We had young people. We had Walter Hutchausen was 40 years old. He was an old guy, and he would never have been drafted. We had a chaplain. We don't hear many stories about that. And I certainly wanted to tell the story of the gravediggers and what that whole experience was like. Matt, you're right. I don't think it says anything strange about you. I think all of us have moments in our lives where we see literally or figuratively car wreck stories that you don't want to look, but you can't not look. And every film that is made, you see a soldier killed and then cut to the next scene. And I was sitting there when I first started like, well, wait a minute. He didn't get beamed there. What happened? Who did it? How does that work? And I felt we weren't trying to gross people out. And I think all of you all that have read it can attest to this. We don't belabor the point, but we do make sure you know this is what happens with a dead body. Here's the whole spectrum of what happens at each stage. And the fact that there's not a single lick of wood when those guys were buried out there. They were buried in bed sacks. The degree to which grave registration went through to make sure there was no misidentification. The extraordinary effort of the Army and the volunteers in Kansas City that received all the personal belongings and made sure that anything that was going to cause heartache, more heartache for a family, blood on a photograph, nudie photos, whatever it is, were cleaned up so that the family could receive these things in the most respectful manner. Just extraordinary behavior. I'm not going to say only could come from America, because look what the Dutch have done, but it speaks well for our country. And we wanted people to know that. We wanted them to know war isn't a Game Boy or some Marvel movie. It's horrible. It changes lives and families forever. But through all of that, when you're ready to give up on humanity, someone like Frida, who doesn't have any resources, she's a 19-year-old girl, does everything possible that she can do. And Emily Mikkels Van Kesnik, who has a lot more resources and knows a lot more at 37, does everything she can do. And that's how our world changes for the better, is everybody doing a little bit and doing what their resources can make. So when I talk to schools a lot of time, I may pick out one of those characters and say, you hear people cynically say one person can't make a difference. Let me disabuse you of that notion. Let's talk about Frida. Let's talk about Emily, because they changed the world we're living in. It's just that not many people have read that. Melissa, to your question, and I'll wrap it up. My military historian, Dr. Seth Givens, who now is the senior military historian for the United States Marine Corps, who contributed so many nights and weekends before he went to work at the Marine Corps. He and I have worked together for 15 years. We had so many, quit moments, give up moments that always happen in huge projects where you're discouraged, you think nobody cares. Just the vastness of the story. We just decided the book will be as many pages as we need to tell the story that we want to tell. And it turned out it was, 450 or so. We footnoted everything, but it's all in the back. So if you want to read it and read it like a novel, it reads that way. If you want to go through and, analyze every single thing where we got it from, all that information's there also, all 800 footnotes. We didn't put them in there to be intimidating. We wanted to make sure that this part of history that hasn't been told as to how did the grave adoption program originate? Who are the people that made it happen? Why did it work where it hasn't worked anywhere else? We wanted people to know, we haven't made this up out of thin air. We've interviewed, I don't know how many people, but it's all there. And if you want to know more, here are the resources to launch from. So that was our commitment. And when we thought we were to the end, I called Seth and I said, "Are we done?" And he said, "Yes." I said, "Are you comfortable? Are you ready to defend criticisms, etc.?" "Absolutely. I have 800 reasons why." And we haven't received one criticism from anybody, not one. We haven't had anybody write us from the Get a Life University telling us, page 22, there's, I don't know, you've got the wrong name or something. That's not to say it's perfect, but our threshold was this. There's 10,000 Americans out there that didn't get a chance to come home. And if it took extra elbow grease from us, if it took some extra pages and our publisher understood that, we're going to do whatever it takes to get it right, because it's too damn important not to. And so that was our commitment, and I'm pleased that I believe that we did that. I think your all's comments reflect that, and I appreciate the generosity of your comments. Yes, there's so many stories we couldn't tell, but in developing the narrative arc for the story, the criteria was no matter how good the story is, if it doesn't connect somehow to Margraten, then we can't use it. And that was painful. There was a Air Force general named Brady who was an ace during World War I. And his son was a fighter pilot, and he was immensely proud of his son. He wrote him this most beautiful letter before he went into service saying, "I always knew you were going to be a great American. You've proven that. Go off, do your best, serve your country." And as fate would have it, on Christmas Eve, they found themselves together in London in 1944. And they went out and had dinner. They had some drinks. They sat on the steps of the restaurant and sang Christmas carols. And about a month and a half later, General Brady got the news his son had been killed. And the initial reports were he was killed by one of his air wing pilots because a German plane was crossing in front of them. And they assumed, and this pilot confessed, erroneously as it turned out, that he was convinced he was the one that killed his son. And the general wanted to see this young pilot. And he sat him down and said, when they believed that that's how his son had been killed, "I don't want you to ever think about this or consider this your responsibility or your fault. You should never feel guilt over this. You did the best that you could do. These are horrible circumstances. Things are happening at light speed. Go on with your life. Be proud about your service." If that doesn't rip your heart out, the magnanimity of a father that's lost the most important thing in his life, and the generosity of spirit, understanding that this is a fork in the road for this young pilot that could destroy his life or launch him, then you don't have a beating heart. And it turned out upon investigation that this pilot was not responsible for killing him. But we wanted to include that story so badly, but there was no connection to Margraten. The addendum to that story is at the very end of the war. The general wrote his wife and said in a telegram, "I found our boy." And he got there to the cemetery where he was buried. So these are a handful of stories. Michael and his team, they know dozens of them. There's so many great stories. And we were and we are, and I am, as much as we've had this great celebrity with the Monuments Men work, nothing that I will do in my career gives me more pride, especially with two young boys at home who missed their father a lot in the last 9 years as we did this research. They'll always know why I wasn't here and what my time was going towards and why.
All right, Robert, thank you so much for this.
I would just ask your listeners and you all, let people know about the Forever Promise Project and the website. I mean, it's just a matter of people spreading the word. And as it happens all the time, people say, well, actually, I know someone who's buried there. And Joesph mentioned about Emily Mikkels Van Kestner coming to the United States. She was in New York, Washington, and met a young congressman from Texas, Lyndon Johnson, who said, if you're trying to find military families, you should go to Texas. There's military bases everywhere. And she flew to Dallas, where I live. Who can make it up? 2 families were there to meet her. One of them lives 5 blocks from where I live. Who can make it up? She couldn't convince that family, even though she watched over the grave of the boy, to not ask for him to be brought back. He was brought back. He's buried 200 yards from where my parents are buried at Sparkman Hillcrest in Dallas. So people say, you know, this is amazing, it's incredible. Actually, and I'm sure Michael's had this happen, the more you talk to people, the more people are aware of this. You hear more and more stories like this. And yes, they are amazing coincidences, but it stops being, you know, miraculous or surprising because of all the relatives that have come out of these families. Think of that last moment in Steven Spielberg's movie about the Holocaust, when all the survivors are there and then the families multiplying. So now there's hundreds of thousands, probably more than 1 million of descendants of these 10,000 men and women that are buried there. And you start talking about it, you're going to get connections. So that's the key at this stage that we want to do. And then, of course, share the story of the book, not because I'm interested in selling one more book. It's great, but we're so underwater financially on this thing. You know, that wasn't the objective. The objective was to help try and change the country for the better. And the book is the beginning medium through which to do that. And it helps people understand how in the heck did the Dutch do this in a world where what's a promise mean? To the Dutch, forever means forever, and now we're at year 81 of forever.
All right, thanks again. I want to thank our panelists and Mr. Edsel for joining us today, as well as our online book club who joined in the chat. Once everyone who participated in today's program will receive a recording, which will also go on our YouTube and new podcasting channels. Our next book club event will be hosted on August 26th, where we will be discussing the book Fate of the Day, War for America, Fort Ticonderoga to Charleston, 1777 to 1780, the second volume of Rick Atkinson's Revolutionary War trilogy. In the meantime, please remember to check our website for more programs in Army history at www.armyhistory.org. Thanks again, and everybody have a great Army History Day.